Now, let's talk about this big security pact, apparently, between UK and Iraq in order to target smuggling gangs. The Home Secretary has signed a landmark joint statement with Iraq to tackle people smuggling and organised crime networks operating across the region. And in Europe, Yvette Cooper visited Baghdad and Erbil, that is in Kurdistan, during an official 3-day visit. And milestone border pacts will strengthen border security cooperation through greater law enforcement work, increased intelligence sharing and a new task force. Iraq and the UK have pledged to prioritise action against smuggler and trafficking gangs, including prosecutions and disruption, information sharing, operations and capability building. Well, doesn't that sound good? One thing I do know is definitely a lot of Kurds are involved in smuggling gangs. So, yeah, perhaps going to Iraq and Kurdistan was exactly the right thing to do if you want to be tough on the gangs, if you want to smash the gangs. But will it work? And what do you reckon Iraq are getting in return? Let's speak now to my babber, the one and only James Price, who's a former government special advisor. And what makes him so apt for this conversation is that he worked with one Nadeem Zahawi, who, of course, at one point was our foreign secretary and is himself from Kurdistan. James, reading this is the sort of strictly embargoed press release that the government, 10 Downing Street, sent out yesterday in order that I could talk about it on the show right now. And when I read this, I thought, well, actually, this is a good idea. From the bits and bobs I know about smuggling gangs is there's all sorts of fingers in the pie making all sorts of untold profits from the biggest international illicit trade that exists. But part of that is indeed a lot of Kurdish gangs. So great, this seems like a good idea. But then the question has to be asked, why was this not done before? And what are they getting in return?
Yeah, these are all good questions. Why were they not being done before? I mean, it's a big question, isn't it? And it's about, I think, the issue of what you might call state capacity. And this is, I think, a big problem, that you can legislate all you want and Parliament can sit there and make these laws. But it's actually when you get down onto the road, are you able to actually do these things? Do we have politicians and senior civil servants who have the actual leadership and management skills to get projects done very much more broadly and specifically on these issues, despite how important, obviously, border security is? There is some of the reason because there have been various bits of international law that have said you can't do some of these things. You've got somebody like Keir Starmer, who used to say at one point that all immigration law itself was racist. So that's a big shift that they're starting to make now. And if we are accurately targeting these various countries and helping to send people back, that's a great thing. I think that's a good use of money to answer your other question as to what these countries may be getting in return. If it's cold, hard cash, frankly, it's worth it because the costs of these smuggling operations is so damaging to the country that it's worth paying a very high price to fix it.
Yeah, I mean, part of this is a very, very long press release. You know how these things are when it rattles on for about 5 pages and you kind of think, I've only got so many hours left of my existence on this planet. But they do detail a little bit of what it looks like financially. So $300,000 for Iraq law enforcement training, and that training is going to focus on organised immigration, crime and narcotics. £200,000 to support projects in Kurdistan to enhance capabilities concerning irregular migration. $300,000 capacity building in Iraq to disrupt serious organised crime. It does seem to me from what this says is not even that much money, really. You're talking about $300,000 here, $200,000 there, $300,000 here to do bits and bobs over there in Iraq and Kurdistan. It doesn't seem to me like that's going to suddenly turn off the tap, particularly as when it comes to very complicated criminal networks. First of all, they know very often how to evade the authorities, and in certain countries, they know how to pay off the authorities as well.
Yeah, it's a very good point. And when you put the numbers like that, the paltry actual amounts, you may discern why these stories don't get a big kind of song and dance in previous governments, because is that really much of a press release? The UK government does lots of these programmes all around the world. And if all we're doing is spending, well, that sounded like less than £1 million on a few sort of spot training programmes, that's not necessarily a huge amount to write home about. Nevertheless, I think it's important that we work with these various groups to get people back. I think the last government worked well with Albania because it was Albanians who were forming a huge number of the people who were coming over in small boat crossings. And as you've said, it seems like Kurdish gangs are the ones who operate a lot of the small boats now going out from Calais across the border. Obviously, we need to do more in all kinds of areas because these flows are coming from all over the place. But frankly, we've got a massive, great navy still. Now, okay, it's not nearly as big and as powerful as it once was or as it should be today. But the idea that it's physically impossible to stop a bunch of these little dinghies from crossing over the channel is obvious nonsense. If we were able to fight back the Spanish Armada, we were able to fight back Napoleon and fight back Hitler, they were not able to cross. Obviously, a few little dinghies with these scumbags crossing people over into them, obviously we'd be able to do that. And the reason that we don't is all this blather about international law, the same kind of blather that has led David Lammy and Keir Starmer to want to give away British sovereign territory in the Indian Ocean, and to say that they would arrest the democratically elected leader of Israel if he were to step foot in the UK. That kind of blather. That's the stuff that really, really we should be targeting. And credit to Kemi Badenoch for saying that she'd look at some of that stuff in her immigration statement yesterday. But look, we should also not demonize some of these countries. Iraq has had obviously a terrible time, first with Saddam Hussein as a very, very evil dictator. And anybody that says, yeah, OK, he was bad, but should go and look at some of the horrible crimes that he actually committed. Then you look at somewhere like Kurdistan, which is, for people that aren't as familiar, a sort of semi-autonomous bit of the north of Iraq. Think of it as like Iraq's Scotland. Is a place that has proper elections where women can drive around in cars themselves to go and vote and have an alcoholic drink without wearing a veil, which is a pretty rare thing in the Middle East. And the Peshmerga, who were the kind of army of the Kurds, were the people on the ground who were fighting back ISIS. I think not just Nadim Zahawi, my old boss, but Kurds in general can be great people, and that we should be doing an awful lot more with them because they're trying to build their own little nation up there. And we should be supporting them in a very, very unpleasant neighbourhood.
Yeah, do you know, I totally agree with you. I've always been a huge fan of the Kurds and always wanted to visit Kurdistan. It's actually like a bit of a Dubai up there. It looks beautiful. And, of course, the big, important military air base in Erbil there, which has enabled US troops especially to have a significant foothold in the Middle East. Talking about the blather earlier, you kept saying the word blather about the international law. And what I think is so ironic here is here's our government going over to Iraq, going over to Kurdistan, doing these deals and saying, we trust your law enforcement, we trust your government to be able to sign pacts to handle this sort of huge international issue. And then you have nationals from those countries coming over here and saying, I want to claim asylum. How on earth can you be, you know, an asylum seeker if you're coming from a country that this country is more than happy to do proper serious business with?
Because these laws are a complete farce. They're a complete joke. We've got charities, so-called charities, operating with impunity, teaching people what to say and how to say it. You'd be absolutely astonished at the number of people who arrive and just happen to have lost their passport as they step foot in the UK, who all happen to be 17, despite looking significantly older than you and I, because that's the age at which you still count as a child and therefore get some preferential treatment. You'd be astonished at the number of these people who say, for example, that they're gay, and then these things get tested in various ways that courts ask people questions and various things.
Yeah, I was going to say, tested in what ways, James?
It's not a job I've done yet, but you know, these are claims that get tested. But there are charities that teach people how to fib about all this kind of stuff. It's a nonsense. And as you say, we're sending huge amounts, not just in these deals we're talking about, but just unilaterally sending huge amounts of aid to these countries from the British taxpayer. It's something like 14 billion pounds a year. Now, if you were to, by the way, reduce that by, I did the calculations, 4.09%, you wouldn't have to do this horrible attack that Labour are doing on British farmers. That would cover that. And coincidentally, about 4% of the foreign aid budget goes to foreign farmers, let alone all the other kind of stuff. And I think the solution would be that we, if not scrapping foreign aid for a little while entirely, while we get our own house in order, we should tie it to deals like this and tie it to things that are in our interest. If you don't start taking back the disgusting criminals, foreign criminals who come to this country and committed the most heinous crimes, you don't take them back, you don't get a penny in British support or aid ever again.
I mean, I quite like the cut of Trump's jib where he's turned around and said to Canada and said to Mexico, you better stop people coming over the borders. You better stop all these drugs coming over the borders or we're going to whack tariffs on you like you've never seen before. And all of a sudden, Mexico's scrambled and gone, right, we're going to stop it. We're going to do everything we can. We're going to do everything we can. And I just think Britain could easily do the same. They could grow a pair. Now, talking about Trump, It'll be interesting to see whether or not the deal to hand over the Chagos Islands can get over the line before Trump gets into power. Apparently, the Prime Minister's National Security Advisor, Jonathan Powell, has embarked on a last-minute tour to salvage the agreement after allies of Donald Trump and the new Mauritian Prime Minister publicly rejected the deal. Why are they so obsessed with giving away the Chagos Islands to Mauritius when there's a huge concern about the compromise? I mean, even the former MI6 boss has issued a warning over this bad agreement. Huge security concerns over whether or not this would enable China to spy on extremely sensitive military bases, a military base that hosts the B-52 long-range nuclear-capable bombers in Diego Garcia. Donald Trump's turned around and said, right, I want another look at this. This doesn't look good. New Mauritian Prime Minister has said he don't want this. Why on earth are we so obsessed with doing this?
This is quite simply what the human brain falls into, dissolves into this kind of idiotic mush on international law. This is what happens. You start getting yourself into these mad situations. So people can be absolutely clear. This is a bit of British sovereign territory with, as you say, a very strategically important base there that we and the Americans operate out of in one of the most important areas in the world. And we have decided, and both parties, because they started under the Tories as well, which is frankly shameful, both parties have done this. We are desperate to give away British sovereign territory to a country that's not terribly friendly towards us. It's much friendlier towards China than the West at the moment. And even though those people now don't like that deal themselves, because there was just an election that happened, the people we negotiated with got no seats, lost. They actually bugged, I think, some of the meetings, and the former Prime Minister is under house arrest there now. And when Starmer said, oh, no, this is really good because Biden wants it, well, Biden isn't going to be in the White House anymore. I'm not sure he's actually been president really for a few months now. And Donald Trump, as you say, doesn't want it. And yet we seem desperate to give away our own territory. I mean, there are some pretty rude words we can come up with to describe this. I'll just call it mad.
It is so mad that it kind of makes you want to whack a tinfoil hat on your bonce and go full, this is in, something to do with them cozying up to China. It's so mental. If Mauritius doesn't want those islands, if America doesn't want those islands to be given to Mauritius, and if the Chagosians themselves don't want to go, why on earth is this Labour government hell-bent on making a decision that the ex-MI6 boss says would affect our security? It absolutely beggars belief. Now, talking about things that beggar belief, apparently, the petition, James, I got obsessed. Everyone got obsessed with that petition. Were you like me with that petition, just sort of constantly pressing refresh just to watch the numbers tick up? I loved that thing. There's a thing about a ticker, isn't there? National debt increasing, just watching numbers rotate is sort of slightly hypnotic. Well, apparently that petition, which I don't know what it's on now, but went way over 2.5 million last time I looked at it, is going to be debated in Parliament. I can't believe it.
It's great fun, isn't it? Look, I mean, it's a bit like smoking. It's not big, it's not clever. It's kind of cool to see this thing tick up. It's not how our democracy works. And I think it is a bit silly that people think this might actually do something. It won't. Nevertheless, you probably should sign it anyway because it's quite funny and because it does ram home to this new government how unpopular they are this quickly. And part of the reason for that is that they have frankly lied about everything they could at every stage they could. All of the things they're doing now, many of these things were not in their manifesto. They fib and they fib and they fib, not just about their CVs in the case of the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, who seems like she's fibbed about most of her career at this point to get into number 11, but about all the other mean, nasty things they're doing. I mentioned the farmers before. Well, the Environment Secretary, Steve Reed, said absolutely not going to happen. It's a Tory lie that we're going to do this. He goes and does it. They say they're not going to put up taxes on working people. They go and do it. They say they're not going to fiddle the rules so they can borrow more and plunge our children and grandchildren into ever greater debt. Then they go and do it. That's why people are so angry about this. And they've got time to turn around and stop and say, okay, maybe we've got all of these things wrong, beginner's luck. Let's go and let's try again and judge us on our next set of results. Or they'll double down with more of their socialist misery. I fear I know which one it's going to be.
But, you know, it's amazing. Every time you think they've really messed it up and gone as far as they could go, they do something else which seems to be not just not ideal or it's going to disconcert or distress a particular subset of society, but that just totally goes against British national interest. The farmers thing, do we really want farmland being sold off to, you know, big private investors and then become, you know, dependent on other people feeding the nation? Do we really want to hand over very vital, secure American, US and UK bases in the middle of the sea over to China to eyeball? I mean, it does make you wonder whether or not Sir Keir Starmer is working in this nation's interest or to another nation's interest. I mean, frankly, sometimes I do kind of think the tinfoil hat fits a little bit too well. James, it's always gorgeous catching up with you, my babber, and hopefully we'll see each other soon.